Children of the Night. What music they make. Well, I already talked about Touhou 6, the Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, and I'm not going to retell that story. This is rather a bonus chapter about an aspect I didn't cover in my main video. The extra stage. Just like this video, the extra stage is an extension to the main content, but it's also its own experience. It's like playing an alternate game, a more extreme version of Touhou 6. Which should be clear from the get-go, because you can't just play the extra stage, you have to unlock it by beating the main game in a 1 credit clear, meaning in 1 continue on normal or harder, which is not an easy feat. You have to really work for it if you want to get access. And when you finally unlocked it, look how it greets you. This is not a difficulty selection, there is no other option here. It's a warning, and a reminder that you see before every new attempt. This stage is made differently. Difficulty is a main ingredient for Touhou 6, and it often challenges you in extreme ways, but not in impossible ways. There is no bullet pattern that cannot be dodged, and even when you start in 1cc attempt and get crushed by Sakuya Izayoi and her time stops, you will still have that weird feeling that this is not an unbeatable challenge. In the past I described it with very sophisticated words. It is always on the edge of what is manageable, but never in the realm of the impossible. It is quite the experience, and for that alone I would recommend playing a Touhou game for yourself. It also has great music and outstanding characters. But I cannot simply recommend the extra stage, because it takes it a step further. It is still not impossible, but pushes you even more towards the edge of what you can handle. The same is true for the higher difficulties of the main game, they are also much harder, but while they still offer a somewhat consistent difficulty curve, the extra stage feels much more experimental. From the very beginning it tries out new ways to get you, and every pattern seems to be designed to be almost impossible. But just almost. The result is an experience in difficulty that I rarely felt before. The odds are stacked so heavily against you, but at the same time you will make some progress or get some valuable learnings with every attempt, and even if it felt impossible during my first 10, 50 attempts, the extra stage is still beatable. And if you are a player that gets thrills out of that, who wants to be pushed as far as possible and to face and overcome the limits of your own skills, then I can absolutely recommend the extra stage of Touhou 6. And possibly the ones from other Touhou games as well, but as of this writing I only beat the one from Touhou 6. If you are itching for a new challenge, then go install a Touhou game right now, because everything from here will be a big spoiler for you. As for the rest, I want to summarize my experience here by showing you one full attempt of the extra stage. I will analyze many parts of it, and you will see my strategies on how to deal with them. And you will also see that it's not impossible. But before we dive into that, I have to explain a couple of things in advance, because the extra stage comes with some rule changes. For starters, there are no continues here, meaning when you run out of lives, it's immediately game over. So you can only beat the extra stage with 1 continue. A 1cc is mandatory here. And if that wasn't hard enough, you only start with 3 lives and you cannot gain additional ones through collecting points. This might seem minor, but it actually changes a lot of the game's dynamics, because in the main campaign, gathering a lot of points and gaining extra lives in the process was a vital strategy. But here it's just not present. It's a pure survival mode. However, you still get 2 extra lives in the form of collectible pickups that are dropped by specific enemies. Getting those is a main priority because it bumps your overall lives to 5. But that's it. 5 lives with 3 bombs each, that's all you get, so you better use all of them wisely. Another important resource are the red power-up items, because you start the extra stage with 0 of them, and getting your max firepower is also vital. Especially in the middle section, you will find yourself in a hopeless situation if you don't deal enough damage. And speaking of damage, my successful 1cc run that unlocked the extra stage was with Reimu A, who I would classify as beginner friendly but with a very low damage output, which makes her not ideal for the stage. And even worse, one of the later patterns hard counters her by confusing her homing attack so it focuses on the wrong targets. I soon came to the conclusion that I had to switch the character. Only to realize that you cannot do that so easily. You see, I unlocked the extra stage only with Reimu A, because I only 1cc the game with her. If I wanted to switch to another loadout, I had to beat the main game in one continue with it as well. At this point I really thought about quitting, because I had already achieved my personal goal. If you think back to my main video about Touhou 6, then you might remember that I chose this game because I wanted to hear a specific song in-game. You and Owen was Her, the first song I ever heard from the Touhou project. It is the theme of Flandre Scarlet, the boss and central character of the extra stage. The stage is her story, and it is a rather compelling one. Flandre is the sister of Remelia, the magnificent final boss of the main game. Flandre is much more powerful and dangerous though. Her ability to basically destroy anything she wants was so fierce that she was locked away in the basement of the Scarlet Mansion, where she was kept for 495 years. Did I mention that she is a vampire? I think that's an important detail. Anyway, now in the extra stage she is finally able to leave the basement, probably because I defeated her sister in the main game, and it's up to Reimu or Marisa to stop her. So you will be facing off against this powerful entity that has been imprisoned for 500 years. How will that translate into her boss fight? Will she be full of hatred and vengeance towards her imprisonment? Or will she be distorted by madness, caused by the unimaginable loneliness that she must have felt? And how can you possibly stop a destructive force like her? That's the narrative drive of this fight, and when I realized that I wouldn't be able to defeat her with Reimu A, I had just scratched the surface of that story. I had heard You and Owen was Her, but I had seen only 2 spell cards of her. There was so much left that I didn't know yet. And in addition, I just liked the challenge the stage had to offer. I wanted to see if I would be able to beat her. So I did what I had to do. I went back into the main game, started a 1cc run with Reimu B, and many attempts later I unlocked the extra stage for her. And many attempts later I arrived at the one that I want to show you today. This was the story how I got here, and now it's time to face Flandre Scarlet herself. And pause. I want to show you this gameplay footage mostly uninterrupted, but at some points I will need to take a short break to get into some details. And before we begin, I want to stress that the extra stage is not only a fight against Flandre Scarlet, but the stage portion itself is also quite remarkable. It already begins this experiment to push the difficulty even further, and that is noticeable from the get-go. What you are seeing right now is footage from the first stage of the main game, and you can see 2 simple patterns here. One are these fairies that come from the top of the screen, pause, and then spread some bullets. And then there is this formation of fairies that moves in an arc towards the bottom. These are very basic, and you will see them on each playthrough, so dodging them will become second nature. That's why it's surprising to see them being reused in the extra stage, but as you're about to see, they are cranked up to 11. The first bullets you will see are targeted directly at me, and the movement I'm making is optimized to manipulate them so I can get safely through and gather as many of the power-up items as possible. I'm using a technique called streaming by staying still and tapping a direction and just making a tiny movement to get out of the way. In the second wave I try to kill most fairies preemptively so they can't even make their shot. They are the ones that spread bullets, and if you let them the screen gets very chaotic. And in between shooting I dash around to get the power-ups. Most of my movement during this stage has been optimized over the course of many attempts, but even though I know all of the patterns by heart, I can still easily get caught by a stray bullet and die. Here I avoided the power-ups because I wanted to max out my firepower later, because that clears the screen for free, but as you can see, that didn't work out. As I said earlier, you can easily get caught, and using a bomb this early is not ideal, but also not uncommon. And the next obstacle is another usual bomb spot. This fairy right here is like a mini-boss, and for whatever reason it cannot be killed while it's still shooting. So you have to endure this boss-like pattern. No bombs used. That was good, so I was back on track. And I might need the remaining ones for her. Patchouli knowledge. To the uninitiated, Patchouli is the main boss of stage 4 and one of the more remarkable fights of Touhou 6. She uses well thought out patterns that try to catch you in between different types of bullets, and here she gets another chance to stop you as the extra stage is mid-boss. Every stage has a mid-boss, so it shouldn't be surprising that the extra stage offers one as well. But after the ordeal I had already been through, I was shocked to see that this was only the midway point. And Patchouli is not easy. In fact, she will face you with 3 of the most difficult patterns in the game, and they each test different skills. For the first one, you'll need to identify the overarching patterns and keep most of the screen in focus. Phase 2 on the other hand is completely scripted, so you have to find a safe route through it. And the last phase is all about micro movements and identifying the dangerous bullets out of a huge swarm. My ideal scenario is to survive the first 2 flawlessly and to use a bomb on the third one. That's how I usually mastered it, so let's see how I did in this attempt. I start out in her face, because this close all of my projectiles connect and I can deal more damage. But I soon have to retreat. During this phase you have to concentrate so hard. I had a little ritual for it. I started to hold my breath, and when it's finished I made booyah! But then you have to switch to your route for phase 2. There are probably a couple of viable approaches here. This one is mine, which leads me to the left before sneaking back to the middle. You have to aim for the bigger gaps in the bullet formation. Even though I know the whole pattern, it is very hard to execute and a lot can go wrong, like... This death right here was devastating. In the attempts before this, I managed to reach Flandre with all 5 lives intact, so this death felt like a low blow. And even worse, I also lost my remaining bombs that should have been used to survive critical moments. At this point, I really was thinking about quitting out and starting over. But I continued. I was still so furious that I refused to use a bomb during phase 3. Usually that would not be possible, but I somehow managed to get through, which restored my confidence. So I calmed down, collected the extra life Patchouli drops and continued. And as you can see, the stage doesn't give you a break. These blasts right here are targeted, so I manipulate them to create gaps. And here you have another example of streaming. Just tap slowly to the right and believe. To mix it up, here's a completely different challenge. These magical books spam out bullets and create these minefields that you need to get through. And in between there are books that shoot blue bullets that target you, so you have to stay on your toes. There are several waves and I usually move from one side to the other so the blue bullets can't catch me. This is easier said than done though. You can see me getting nervous there for a second, but I could keep my focus. Which is important because here's another streaming segment. The bullets target you, so if you move around a lot, they will swarm the screen in chaotic patterns. So just tap right and believe in the stream. And grab the second extra life. Now I'm at 4 with full bombs, which is not bad. This run is still alive. And here's Flandre. So this was everything you have to survive to meet with her, and getting here is already an achievement to be proud of. Just arriving here took me around 40 attempts, and I still remember my first fight with Flandre vividly. When her theme started playing, I could feel my heart pounding. I was sure that I would die fast, but surprisingly I made it through her first phase unscathed. It was weirdly easy. Look at this pattern, this is not comparable to what we've seen from Patchouli earlier. This is maybe on the level of the stage 2 mid-boss. So this was an easy win, and while she was starting up her first spell cards, I was filled with determination. But then I took a glimpse at her health bar and saw... 9 extra lives? So 10 in total? That's... impossible. Remilia, the final boss, had 5. 10 is just extreme, and with a normal pattern and a spell card for each life, she could potentially have 20 phases. Which boss has 20 phases? Well, actually, Flandre has only 18, but I didn't know that back then. This discovery was so shocking that my attempt continued like this. A psychological defeat. After all what I had to survive to get to this point, facing off against a boss with so many phases seemed unwinnable. And I can't blame anybody who gives up right here. As I said earlier, just meeting Flandre is already an achievement. But for me it was not enough. So more than 100 attempts later, or maybe 200? I honestly don't know, it were too many to count, but many attempts later I arrived here with 4 lives. which again was not ideal. I did better in the past, but at this point I had some confidence that I could win. And the first phase once again went smoothly. Her first spell card is a test of your perception because bullets come flying from all directions. A test I failed. There goes the next bomb. However, it's always better to bomb than to die, so this outcome was okay. Another rather simple normal phase before one of the most unique spell cards in the game. Levitine is completely scripted, so you have to find a safe route, but you also have to be fast because he's chasing you around. Especially this part needs to be performed quickly. This is the first roadblock of this fight, because when you don't know how to deal with it, your lives and bombs will just melt away. Now it's one of the easiest patterns for me, but in the beginning it was the end of most attempts. You will have noticed by now that Flandre is all about her spell cards. The normal phases in between are like a quick break. A break that can kill you if you are not focused, but at least it's not as complicated as this one. Apparently she can just multiply herself, and each version shoots out her own bullets. You can kill the decoys to make this phase easier, but her health bar will only deplete when you damage the real version. There just went another bump. But that's okay, I usually have to take one here. More often than not I even lost a life to this phase, even on my more experienced attempts. Next we have another easy normal phase, followed by Kagome Kagome, another very creative pattern. Getting your area to maneuver restricted like that makes it harder to dodge and forces some very tight movement. But it's really nice to look at, especially how the big projectiles move the smaller ones. The bomb I just took is actually ideal, because the next spell card usually kills me, so arriving there with 0 bombs is exactly what I wanted to achieve. So far there have been no deaths to Flandre, so I really brought this back after my unfortunate demise to Patchouli. The next spell card, Maze of Love. I have a special way to deal with it, because I'm doing it wrong. You can see me staying at the bottom and trying to get through these very narrow patterns. And failing, but the safe time frame after my death is enough to clear this phase. You are actually supposed to go around her. See these big openings in her projectile rings? This is where you should move through, but I just couldn't. I tried it many times and failed just as often, so I changed my approach and stayed at the bottom where it is possible to sneak through, but I usually take a death here. Which might not be the best strategy, but it worked for me. And since I already took a break here, did you notice some kind of motif in Flandre's techniques? For me it was during struggling with Maze of Love when I realized the theme that her spell cards follow. Actually 2 themes, because one is the highly experimental nature of her patterns. Stuff like Maze of Love or Levantine feel like they were too extreme for the main game. Both require you to learn the specific ways how to get through them, but they are also punishing and can cause a lot of deaths. Were they in the main game, they could end whole runs by themselves. I can imagine that Sun came up with them while designing the other boss fights, but scratched those patterns because they were too far out there. And because they didn't fit to the style of the other characters. 4 of a Kind is a great example for that, because creating 3 fake versions of yourself is a massive display of power, but one that didn't really fit to the themes other bosses had going on. But it fits Flandre. It shows how much more powerful she is, but also something different. If she is able to do that, why is she not repeating it? And the same can be asked for the other extreme strategies she uses. Other bosses would reiterate on those mechanics and create alternate versions. But Flandre is just showing them off before moving to something completely different. And I think I know why. Flandre is playing games. While I can't decipher Cranberry Trap, Levantine is like playing catch. 4 of a Kind references poker, and Kagome Kagome is actually a Japanese children's game. And if you consider her backstory, this gets more meaning. This fight right here is probably the first encounter with somebody from outside the mansion that Flandre had for almost 500 years. She might be able to just annihilate her foe by showing off her full power, but that would immediately end it. This might be the only fight Flandre will ever get, so she wants to enjoy it as much as possible. That would also explain the easy normal sections in between her spell cards. She doesn't want you to die here, she just wants to get some time to prepare her next game. With that strategy she can prolong the fight and get as much fun out of it as possible. This makes the fight a bit tragic. Flandre was alone for so long and has to fight the first person she meets after getting free. She could probably just destroy Reimu, but that might lead her back into loneliness. As usual, I might be reading too much into it, but while playing this fight over and over again, I started to feel sad for Flandre's long imprisonment and saw her fight as a way to connect with her. A weird form of conversation, probably the only one that she is capable of. Did that make sense? If not, then maybe the remaining phases can convince you, or you'll find your own interpretation. Back to the fight. With 3 lives and full bombs, this had become one of my most promising attempts. For the next spell card, Starbow Break, I imagine Flandre throwing balls or confetti into the air, which then turn into deadly projectiles on their way down. It is finicky and you have to foretell where the safe spaces will be, but I did manage to beat it without using a bomb in the past. But not today. For this spell card and for many others, it is also essential that you follow her around so you deal enough damage. Getting trapped far away from her will prolong her phases. Next up we have Catadioptric, which is another phase in which she throws balls around. However, this time they bounce off from the walls, which can catch you off guard. This death right here really hurt. Not only did I lose 2 unspent bombs, but it also brought me down to 2 lives, which at this point was not great. The later stages of this fight are not only hard, I also had much less training with them. Basically I just lost my safety net and couldn't allow any more mistakes. And as you're about to see, Flandre is getting more aggressive now. In this phase she targets you directly, which indicates that the playtime is coming to an end. You have to manipulate the shots with your positioning to get through it safely. And in her next spell card, Clock that ticks away the past, I cannot really find a game that she might be playing. I can only interpret it as a preparation for the next phase. She is counting down right now. What might come next? By the way, the rotating lasers have a very dangerous hitbox, but they are only active a couple of frames after they are fully drawn out, which I abused here. Nevertheless, it costed me 2 bombs to proceed, because this pattern can trap you easily. And speaking of traps, after she counted down, she starts, and then there will be none, and just vanishes. She is gone, so how are you supposed to deal damage? Well, you don't, because there are 2 ways to clear every boss phase. You can either deplete the health, or you can wait until the timer runs out. This mechanic is present in the whole game, and when you get here you will probably have timed out a couple of boss phases by accident. But here it is mandatory, you have to wait until the timer reaches 0. It is rooted in the main mechanics, but forcing you to time her out feels revolutionary. When I first got here I was confused and was searching Flandre in the corners of the screen. It took me several attempts just to realize that you have to wait for the timer. This is Flandre playing hide and seek, and she's probably laughing at my futile attempts to survive. And surviving here is not easy. This pattern right here gets tighter with every wave, but the true test are the blue orbs that were chasing me before. You have to once again manipulate them with your positioning to create openings to get through. All in all, this phase went well. I had to bomb at the end, but that put me at 2 lives and 0 bombs, which is the best result I ever achieved here. It was the first time I had more than 1 life for the final spell cards, which is amazing considering I had 2 unnecessary deaths in between. So this is it, the best chance I ever got to beat Flandre. Let's see how it played out. And that's how I defeated Flandre Scarlet. This last phase is something special as well, because it slowly builds up, the waves get faster and faster, and in the last seconds it's almost impossible to keep track of them. I came really close playing it perfectly. Losing a life this late was not critical because she went down before it got dangerous again. but coming so close to beating it flawlessly and then failing, it kinda hurt. The spell card is called Ripples of 495 Years, and I can't see any games in it. After her hide and seek phase was defeated, it must have occurred to her that she could actually lose this fight. The prospect of getting defeated and being sent back to the basement forced a strong reaction out of her, and this is shown by these bullet waves. They remind me of sound waves, and I can picture her shouting while sending out the bullets. Or maybe laughing? On its last stretch, this fight gets desperate because the games she was playing are over. I could feel the sadness in myself. I was exhausted and overjoyed that I actually managed to beat her, but at the same time I felt this weird melancholy that you might know as well. It's that weird special feeling you get whenever you finish a game that you fully enjoyed. It's mostly happy, but paired with the realization that this journey is over, it can quickly pivot into sadness. And the extra stage of Touhou 6 was quite a journey, one of the most remarkable experiences I had in gaming. So remarkable that I couldn't just stop playing Touhou 6 and instead went back into the main game and kept playing until I once succeeded with Marisa B as well. And as for Flandre, protagonist Reimu in her snarky way denies her to leave the mansion, but she also offers her to come back and play with her again. If my interpretation about Flandre's spell cards is correct, then this is a happy ending for her. Her endless loneliness is over. And that's the end of this story, and for Touhou 6. In the end, the extra stage is an optional addition and you never need to touch it. Most of you probably shouldn't, because as I said in the beginning, this stage is designed differently. But putting the difficulty aside, it proved one crucial thing for me: the creativity of these games. In the main Touhou 6 video I showed you how the main characters come to life through their bullet patterns, and there are so many cool ideas in them. But then in the extra stage I encountered these even more extreme patterns that push the boundaries of what can be done in these games. There is so much to discover here and I wanted to share that, especially with players that will never encounter Flandre for themselves. And that's what I want to do in these StoryFIGHT videos. Take a deep dive into a very special boss fight and tell you my story about it. I hope you enjoyed. In the future there might be more of this, but the next video will be a return to my usual format. Which also means that it will take even more time than this one, so I'll see you in 40,000 internet years. Stay tuned.